Hey everybody, Steve here. We're talking about Mark chapter 9, verses 30 to 50 to close out that chapter. And what we're seeing here is that in the very first part that Jesus departed from there and passed through Galilee, and he didn't want anybody to know it. But he taught his disciples, he said, the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and after he's killed, he will rise on the third day. But they did not understand the saying and were afraid to ask him. I mean, we already seen passages before where it talks about the hardness of the heart of these people that had ignored God, ignored his word. And even with the disciples, even though Jesus picked the disciples, and even though they spent time with Jesus and saw the miracles and the healings and the casting out of the demonics and all of those things, they still did not believe. They still did not understand. And that just goes to show how hard-hearted they were. But again, God wins out, and Jesus wins out. And when they yield to him, and it gets to the point of where they do understand, and even after his death, that's where the ball really gets rolling, and they go on to preach the gospel. And it's just amazing things that happen, especially in the book of Acts. Anyway, it talks about, he goes into the next passage, the next little part where they were kept quiet, and Jesus asked them, what were you discussing on the road? And they were talking amongst themselves about who was going to be the greatest. And it ends up, he says, anyone who desires to be first, he shall be last of all and servant of all. Again, this is a prime example of Jesus and his example of doing the will of the Father instead of his own. Instead of setting up a kingdom and saying, hey, I'm in charge, like a Roman Caesar who thought he was God, and it's the exact opposite, but of being a servant to all, because God sent his son because the whole world had fell into sin and choose to sin. And it's just amazing what he did. Anyway, he goes on, he says, he took a little child and set them in the midst of them, and when he had taken him in his arms, he said to them, whoever receives one of these little children in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me, which is God the Father. Isn't it interesting that Jesus will take us no matter what situation we're in, as long as we yield to him, as long as we yield to the gospel message and that conviction of the Holy Spirit of what we've done has offended God, and we yield and we repent and we confess and we lay down our lives and just ask for his forgiveness. And then we follow Jesus Christ. It's like Jesus picking up that little child. We can either be obedient and we can yield to him picking us up as he reached out his arms to us. And it was God that reached out to us. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. He reached out. He initiated that action. And we have the choice to respond to that gospel message. And if we do respond in the correct manner, we yield to Christ and we let him take us up and to where we're in him and he's in us. It goes on and he says, whoever receives one of these little children in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me but him who sent me. Again, this is servanthood, this is stewardship. This is not doing things to be noticed of men. This is not being like the Pharisees or the fake Christians or the hypocrites or the false teachers or the false prophets who want to be in the limelight. But rather, this is exactly what it is. Whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me. And it's all about Jesus. It's all about God. It's all about for the glory of God and doing his will. It's not about us, because we were bought with a price. Think of it as a slave. You were bought for a price, and your interests are no longer your own, but rather the one who paid for you, and that's Jesus Christ. And so we have to get to the point of where we yield and we are a steward of God and his word and the time and the talents and the things that he's given us. And that's a hard lesson to learn, because and myself included, because there's so much more that I can lay down in what I'm doing now. And but we need to continue. We need to walk that walk, and we need to be in God and his word and to conform to his image. And anyway, in the next little passage, John answered him saying, teacher, we saw someone who does not follow us casting out demons in your name, and we forbade him because he did not follow us. Isn't that like the world and immature Christians to say, well, if they don't if they're not part of us, they're not us. You know, they're not real Christians. Is basically what I'm kind of getting out of this. And isn't that true? We see this with pastors and associate pastors and evangelists and prophets and whatever. You know, if they don't come to our church, you know, we want nothing to do with them. You know, if they're not filling our coffers full of tithe money, they're not one of us. And so we'll have nothing to do with them. That's why the church on this side of the street and the church on the other side of the street, that rarely will they talk and communicate. Rarely will they help each other out. And that's the problem, because it's not about being a church. It's not about being, oh, they're not one of us. It's about following Jesus Christ and being obedient to him. Because if you're obedient to Jesus and his word, then you'll find out it's not about denominations, but it's about being obedient, righteous, and holy to be the salt of the earth and the light to the world. Jesus says, do not forbid him, for no one who works a miracle in my name can soon afterwards speak evil of me. For he is not against us, is on our side. So again, it comes down to the sound doctrine. It comes down to doing the will of the Father and following in the example of Jesus, not necessarily following in the steps of a denomination or a pastor or a person, a man or a movement or a cause. And it talks about giving a cup of water. He says, I say to you, he will by no means lose his reward. Again, we see the servant type of mentality, the stewardship. And talks about those who stumble, and that if you cause somebody to stumble, you know, it'll be a millstone hung around your neck, and that's a bad thing. And then he talks on about hell, that you know, it's better to enter if your hand causes you to sin. The things that you do, the actions, the activities that you do, if your foot causes you to sin, where do you run to? What do you look forward to? Where do you go for comfort? And then to your eye, you know, what do you see that gives you pleasure? Do you seek after the things of the world? Do you run after the sinful desires of this world? Do you take part and take a hold of that sin that is a pleasure for a season? And if you do that, you end up in hell, where it says, into the fire that shall never be quenched. And we already talked about this before, that hell is everlasting. The second death, the lake of fire, is everlasting. We have an eternal God, and we have an eternal damnation. We have an eternal reward. And for some people, they still don't understand that. And then it goes on, it says, for everyone will be seasoned with fire, trials and tribulations, and every sacrifice will be seasoned with salt. So the sacrifices that we do in our lives to do the will of the Father must be seasoned with salt. Not of our own creation, but of a changed nature that God makes us. And through his word, that's the salt, that's the seasoning, to be set apart. And salt can be used to preserve things. It can be used to keep things. And and to make things taste better. And it's just amazing all the things that you can do with salt and purify things. And then salt is good, but if it loses flavor, how you season it. Have salt in yourselves and have peace with one another. And that's what it comes down to here in Mark chapter 9, as we close that out, is that our lives are supposed to conform to the image of Jesus Christ. We're supposed to learn that just as the disciples, even though they're hard-hearted, they continued on following Jesus Christ. And he is the author and the finisher of our faith. But we need to yield like that little child, and we can either throw a fit and throw a tantrum on the floor, or we can get to the point of where we yield to him and we lay down our disobedience, our immaturity, our everything that is against God, and we can lay that down and have him pick us up into where we have that close relationship with the Father, and he's in us and we're in him. And then we can go out and we can be the salt. And that's what that talks about. So anyway, that's the end of Mark chapter 9, Lord willing. We'll come back tomorrow and we'll hit Mark chapter 10. So anyway, take care, God bless. Peace.